Hi everyone and welcome back to Expressive Photography. I'm Alistair Ben. Now it's been a few weeks since I've spoken with you, and pretty much the reason for that I explained in the last video I posted, which is I'm trying to basically find my creativity again. I'm trying to re-establish my relationship with landscape photography that I've always had, which has been, it's something I've had to do. And as I explained in my last video, I felt this pressure to create for the channel. Every time I went out with a camera, it was about making a product, making a video, having something profound to say. And ultimately, I got to the point where I was no longer enjoying it, and therefore it was time to stop. Now, I've been playing an awful lot of guitar over the last couple of weeks, couple of months, in fact. Because that's been my creativity. And if you want to read more about where I'm at just now and more behind the making of this video and some more of the kind of thoughts and profound feelings I've been having, check the link below and head over to our blog, and there's an article there waiting for you to read. And of course, it's very useful for us if you leave your comments and all that type of thing. Now, a week or so ago, I actually went out very early one morning with my camera, and it was the first time in weeks and weeks that I'd been out. And what I noticed was that I got there very, very early. It was well before the sun came up, and I left the car park and was walking up the glen there. And everything was very subdued, very low contrast. It was misty, a bit ethereal, a bit foggy, but there was no really heavy contrast, particularly in the forested mountains that I was kind of there to engage with and there to enjoy. And if we dive straight into Lightroom here, you'll see some of these raw files. These are the first shots I took, and it was very early in the morning. There's no light on them. This is just an exposure. And if we go into the develop module here, you'll see in the histogram, it's really middle of the road, really mid-contrast, mid-tone, low contrast. As soon as we, so this is the native contrast that exists in the scene. And you'll see the next one is quite similar. It's a little bit darker. And then this one's very atmospheric. But if we stick with this first image first, I've been to this place when it's been side lit and it's really contrasty. And what happened here was I was in a very subdued mood. I was in a quiet mood. And I recognized that the relationship between the contrast and the brightness of the scene was directly mirroring my mood. So I was accepting that these low contrast, sort of slightly desaturated photographs or scenes or raw files were really good. I mean, I really liked the fact that when luminosity and contrast aren't so dominant, the subtle lines, forms, shapes, and color palette somehow has a more profound voice. If I start to just increase the contrast and then maybe darken the fraction to get it a bit more saturated, and we'll just muck about with the color palette there. As soon as we introduce contrast, and if I drag up the yellows a bit to make them a bit more luminous. As soon as we introduce contrast and brightness, you can see there the histogram has been widened, which means there's more contrast there. As soon as we introduce that, everything gets louder. The image has more impact. It doesn't have that soft, delicate feel to it anymore. And this is very much something that social media demands, is impact. It's very difficult to get people to like your photographs or comment on your photographs if they're low impact. Some people can. They've built up big followings of people who appreciate quiet work. For most people, getting anybody to notice quiet work is very, very difficult. And what that basically means is you have to make them for yourself. You know, if everything we do becomes about external validation, then it becomes a pretty lonely existence, because we're not self-actualizing, we're not just being self-satisfied. So what I really got into this morning was just this very quiet feel. Now, of course, I waded the river in my trekking shoes because I'd forgotten my gum boots, my rubber boots. So I had soaking wet feet and was freezing cold. But I was very much drawn to these quiet colours. And you'll see if we crank up the contrast and make it louder, of course, it has more impact, but it loses some of its native quality, that sort of quieter voice. And I think it's important from a creative point of view to allow some of this stuff to be valid in its own right, in that we don't have to push everything and make everything louder the whole time. So one of the things I really want to talk about during this video is, a lot of you know that I've produced a couple of ebooks over the last 2 years. One is called Luminosity and Contrast, and the other is called The Colour of Meaning. Those 2 ebooks are a complete guide to how to see the world in an emotional way and compose by feel, and to understand that every single composition is the arrangement of feel. So they might not be very exciting in terms of their title, but the content of them, as the testimonials from people who bought them will testify, is that the way we see the world and the way we feel the world is of the most profound importance. It's more important than buying a new lens or investing in any other piece of equipment. It's an investment in ourselves, because creativity comes from within. Now, if you give yourself permission to make photographs for yourselves, you can experiment and try all sorts of different things to try and interest your mind, I suppose. I've got a pretty busy mind. I think a lot. I tend to be chewing over business issues or self-development issues or health issues. There's all sorts of things we have in our minds all the time. Of course, how COVID has affected our business has been heavily on my mind. And what I was experimenting here was just everything out of focus. There's nothing in this photograph that's actually focused. And I like the way that we can introduce feel by cooling the image down a little bit. Maybe taking the hue and exploring and seeing, well, I can make those greens a little bit less green and a little bit more yellow. And then we can introduce a color palette that's very soft. And I like the fact that when I'm processing, especially if I'm talking to you folks simultaneously, is I'm switching off my brain. I'm just feeling my way around the content to produce something that's really, it's very calm and a little bit mysterious. Now we can add a little bit of clarity and texture back into these photographs just to give them a little bit of bite, but then pull back the dehaze also, and that keeps that atmospheric feel going on. So this is a photograph that's just about atmosphere. The color palette is so subtle that it has some impact on our psychology and our emotions, but it's a calm, gentle photograph. Now, as the first 3 photographs there were taken when it was the sun hadn't risen above the surrounding hills yet, so everything was in shadow. And then when the sun did come up and I was walking down the trail, I looked behind me and saw the way the sunlight was filtering through the trees here. And again, this is definitely a photograph about atmosphere. However, it's a photograph that has much higher contrast natively. And this is the point of the Luminosity and Contrast ebook, is that contrast, luminosity, and geometry have a massive impact on how we engage with the world. This has higher contrast, warm colors, and high luminosity. And that has a joyful feel associated with it. Even though I can make this, I could turn this into creepy woods, quite quickly. We can, by reducing the luminosity, we have made it no longer joyful. We have made it sinister and oppressive and mysterious and slightly creepy. By cooling the color palette, you kind of start to mirror what it's more like under a moonlit night. It becomes a much colder space, darker space, less bright space, super contrasty space, and therefore it has impact and mystery and intrigue and is slightly creepy. Now, if I reignite the joy with a brighter color palette, we can have dark, colorful, or dark and joyful images. And this has a very different feel to it, but it's not as joyful as when we have a brighter color palette or a brighter image. This is the direct relationship between luminosity, contrast, the atmosphere, the color, and the geometry. We've seen change the color, change the feel. And this is something that I dig into in hundreds of pages of ebook. So please do yourself a favor, click on the link below, go to the education section of the Expressive Photography website and do yourself a favor and buy an ebook. I've even put a 15% discount code down there for you as well, just to give you a little bit of an incentive to do so. So this for me isn't about processing images. This is just about demonstrating the impact of all of these choices that we have. Now, as soon as the sun came up over the horizon, it started to skim. It's more or less in the north now, so this is skimming in a sort of southwest direction across this hillside. And I was really fascinated by the way this tree was just catching the light. And you can see we've got most of this dark area is a shadow, but we do have some highlights. Now, as soon as I exaggerate that contrast, we have an image that just comes alive. And because there's native contrast to the scene, we had darker shadows to start off with, and I can pull those shadows down a bit, pull the blacks down a little bit. Because I already had contrast natively in the raw file, exaggerating it, stretching it, making it more contrasty is believable and enhances and sort of it magnifies the same message. We're not changing the message particularly because there was already contrast there. We're just exaggerating it, making it more powerful. This is a tree that can shout because the background is so subdued. I'm going to quickly come in just with a radial filter here. And I think I'll cool the outside a fraction, but I'm going to add some texture because I really want to try and just allow those trees in the background there, and I'll do the same with so what I'll do is I'll crank up the contrast so that I can see the background trees a little better, and then I'll use the luminance mask here to take the highlights off so that you can see that gradient now is only impacting the shadowy background and not the foreground. And this is an image that I could really like. I mean, I posted something similar on Insta, I think, last week, and I really liked it. And I'll just do one final example here, which was this scene here. Now, this is a piece of the hillside that I know really well. And I photographed it many times in different seasons, and I love the way that the foliage or the lack of foliage and the light change the feel every single time I go there. And again, this is an image that can take quite a lot. I mean, I'll show you how much contrast you can create in these files. Now, doing a -5 stop adjustment to your exposure might seem a little extreme, but this just shows how much contrast that you can pile into these frames. But I am going to take off some of that vibrance. And again, we can change the feel of this massively by every adjustment we make. Something I'm a big advocate of, and something I cover quite a lot in The Colour of Meaning, is how drastically we can change the feel of an image by making very subtle adjustments. Every single slider in this, in Lightroom or any other software that we choose to play with, every single slider is an emotional slider. There's an emotional consequence associated with that. So really what I wanted to demonstrate today is that where we have luminosity natively in our scene, so luminosity and contrast, atmosphere, color, and geometry, where we have those elements present in the scene, we have a feeling associated with those. And I cover this quite a lot in the blog post, and I talk about the quality of our life as being such an important thing for us, yet we obsess over the quality of light. And I think what I wanted to demonstrate with these images is that this one, which was taken in very flat, low contrast light, I had thoughts while I was making this photograph about acceptance and about my own personality traits and about maybe some of the darker sides to the thinking that comes into my mind occasionally, and thinking about that being okay, accepting that. And I think the problem with social media driven photography these days is that we only think that certain things are acceptable and other things are not acceptable. And I want us to embrace all aspects of our creativity. If I want to make quiet, introspective images about non-judgment and acceptance and peace and tranquility and just being in the moment, I want to be able to do that without guilt. Equally, if I want to make big, bold, brash, volume-ridden statements about how confident and happy I am, that's fine too. All of these things exist on a spectrum, my emotional spectrum. And I really would encourage you to explore this aspect of your own creativity, because I can guarantee this is where you will find your gold, not in following the mantras or repetitious behaviors associated with other photographers. Find your own inner landscape in the landscape, and this is where you will get the most joy. Thank you very much for watching. It's been a pleasure to be back. I really want to make videos that are more passionate. You'll notice that I don't have any B-roll in this video at all. I didn't record any of myself in the field. And what that allowed me to do was to naturally photograph, to just photograph what I wanted to and at the pace that I wanted to, without having to talk to the camera, without having to ruin the moment for myself. There's no point in me running this channel to make content that's good for you if it's not good for me. You'll get the most out of me by me being me and having the freedom to create how I want to create. Please consider any of the links below, the blog post or any of the ebooks or video series that we have on offer. Of course, we're still in a situation where we're not running any workshops, and this is the only income we have is from selling our products. So you can really support us by, and obviously really we do believe that you will grow as a photographer and as a person from the ebooks that we have to offer you. So please consider dropping in and having a look at those. Do the old bell notification as well. We're going to be producing less content, so if you want to know when we're posting a video, the best way to do is to subscribe, hit the bell notification button, and you won't miss a single video that we produce. Coming up in a week or so, I'm talking to Bruce Percy again. Bruce has got a new book coming out from his time in Hokkaido in Japan. An incredible project. I've got a copy coming very, very soon. So I'm going to have Bruce Percy on the show in a few weeks' time. So I'm really looking forward to chatting to Bruce about this incredible art project that he's brought together again. But for now, thank you very much for watching. The next thing I would like you to do is click on one of those links below, and I will speak to you again very, very soon. But for now, I hope you're safe and well wherever you are in the world, and take care. We'll speak again soon.